Someone stood by the ancient stone monument as I approached. In this AI-generated world, things seem to just change and shift at every moment. I must be quick. As the ocean's roar hit me, I knew it was time to ask my vital question. Are you a transformer? Because you look Optimus fine. And moving on swiftly from the terrible jokes to the AI video creation things. Let's have a look at some more videos there. Okay, I've got some more videos on the screen so you can see the sort of things that this Deforum extension for the AUTOMATIC1111 WebUI creates. It's a script that makes 2D and 3D animations from Stable Diffusion. It's got lots of features in there. Essentially, you can zoom in and out, move up and down, left and right, and spin round and round. Lots of different features in there to play with, lots of different ways to create videos. I'll be using the AUTOMATIC1111 WebUI, which I assume you have up and running there, are the installation instructions, just 6 steps, run through those, and you will have your WebUI there and ready to go. A little note for the Colab users: if you've used the Deforum Colab before, it's basically exactly the same as that. If you want to run that Colab locally so you have all the features, I've got an entirely different video for that, but in this one I'm going to be going through installing that extension, the basic features on those tabs, some saving and loading, resuming from previous animations in a slightly different way because I found that resume didn't work, some examples of what the defaults look like, some videos there just so you can see what it does, how to easily figure out what any of these options do because there are a lot of options, and if you can make it all the way through to the end, there's some bonus tips including a little bit of live video jockey action. Let's dive straight into this then. The installation, when you're running your WebUI, if you have the listen or the share options enabled, that can cause problems with the extensions at the moment. That may change in the future, but if you have either of those options for now, just take them out. That's probably the easiest way to get to your extensions tab, and then you can go to the available sub tab. You just click load from and you get this big list here. Deforum script is the one you want to install. There's loads of others, feel free to install those, but I'm just focusing on this Deforum script, so go over and click the install button. I've already got it installed, so it shows up on my installed tab here. It may also get updated at some point in the future, so you can click check for updates. That will check for update. Hopefully, like mine, yours will say latest. If it doesn't, then you can click apply and restart UI, and that will update for you and restart the UI. All really nice and easy to get installed and running. If you now go to the Deforum tab, you will see this info and links at the top. We'll just open that quickly, but there is a lot of extra information in there. I'll shrink that back down again. I'm going to go through these reasonably quickly, as you should be familiar with these from the text to image tab. They're all over there as well. Override settings, obviously overrides your settings from a custom file. Just pop your custom file in there. You've got the width and the height, all these familiar options, restore faces, high-res fix, which doesn't have a pop-up, do note that. Your sampler is there, and then you've got the seed for the sampler there, so you'll probably be playing with those a little bit. Enable extras, you've got the extras down there, again, same as from the original tab. Steps to go along with your sampler, DDIM ETA, which you might have seen in settings already, and that applies when you're using the DDIM sampler, and those last three I completely ignore. Save settings and save samples, I also leave those ticked. And one thing that you probably will want to change each time is this batch name. That is basically the name of the directory where you are going to save your images relative to where you've got this installed. When it does generate it, it tells you in the information at the bottom exactly where it's saved anyway. File name format, time string, index and prompt. I leave it like that because that's a fine file name format. Seed behavior, you've got a number of options in here. You've got iter, fixed, random and schedule. Now they all do something ever so slightly different. So iter is the seed will increment by 1 for each subsequent frame of the animation. Fixed is obviously a fixed seed, random is a random seed, and schedule, you can set your own schedule. That covers that tab. Lots of things in there. Let's go to keyframes. Now, this is where you've got your animation mode, 2D, 3D, and video input. The video input is actually on the Init tab. Where you specify your video is a little bit later, but those are your three main modes there. Max frames, number of frames in your video. Border, you've got replicate or wrap. Wrap is a bit like in a video game where when it scrolls off the bottom it will appear again back on the top. Replicate is more like a sort of smear. Now you've got all these other settings here like 2D and 3D settings where you've got something that looks a little bit strange, and then you've got something which looks a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of them. They go all the way down here until you hit coherence. These are all fairly simple, and remember you can pop over any of these things. I'm hovering over angle and it tells me this is a 2D operator to rotate canvas clockwise, anti-clockwise in degrees per frame. So if you're not sure what any of these settings do, you can just hover over and it will tell you. Really handy. Now these all have the same sort of format, pretty easy to understand. It's the frame number and then what the value should be set to at that frame number in brackets. So you've got frame number, colon, and then a value in brackets. And as you can see, these are all the same, even if some of them do have maths and other things in there. Not to worry, it's all fairly simple, and we'll be zeroing this out later, getting rid of a few of the complex looking things, and that's kind of how we start the template. Now, the next thing we've got down here is diffusion cadence. If you're used to Disco Diffusion Turbo, this is the turbo. It essentially just skips some steps, diffuses a frame, and then it will guess the movement, which will be nice and smooth, and then it will diffuse the next frame after that, depending on what you've got your diffusion cadence set to. All of them work quite well. I quite like 4. 2 is also quite good. 1 has a lot of changes, but that may be the sort of video that you're looking for. 8 is quite nice. It's really difficult. You'll have to play with the cadence just to see how smooth you want it and how quickly you want to generate the video and what the whole thing looks like. But 4 is a good starting value, I think. 3D depth warping, I tend to leave that exactly the same. I barely ever play with that at all. Feel free to change that yourself. Prompts, much like keyframes, can also be scheduled there. We've got 0, 60, 80, and 100. It changes, changes the prompt as you go along. It's got a beautiful durian, a coconut, a banana, and a scenic countryside. As it says up here, it supports weights and negative prompts as well after minus, minus, neg. For the most part, that's just going to be a scenic countryside with a weight of 1, and then all that other complicated stuff is just an example. Let's have a look at the next bit we've got here, which is the Init tab. This is your initialization image, Init. If you're going to use Init, you can tick Init, and you'll also need a strength in there of some value as well. Strength 0 is it doesn't use the image at all, and strength 1 is it totally uses it. That's as strong as you can get. The image itself is specified there in the Init image path. There it's got a URL, so it'll download an image from the internet, but of course that could be a local directory as well. Along with that, you can use a mask if you tick the use mask box. Same thing, mask file is where you put that, and there are some other options for that as well. Video input, if you selected the video type, this is where you've got your video path there, video init path, and videos also have mask options as well, so you can tick the use mask option and then use that. Resume from time string, you can tick from that, and then you can carry on from a particular time string. That's the time string in your settings file, which is also the first name of any of your file names of your frames in there. Personally, I found that hasn't worked. I've tried to do a few things. I'm probably doing it completely wrong. What I do to resume instead is I just take the last frame of the video and I put that in as the init image. We'll take that out, and there I'm using that, and then I tick the init image and then put that strength up quite high. Then it carries on from that frame, and that's like a sort of resume. I know it's not quite right. If anyone knows how to properly resume, or if it really is bugged, then that would be interesting to know. Video output sort of lives on its own. It's got a different settings file as well. For the most part, I like to do 24 FPS and FFmpeg. If you haven't got FFmpeg installed already on Linux, you can just apt install FFmpeg. If you're on Windows and you're running in a Conda environment, you can Conda install FFmpeg, or you can install FFmpeg any way you fancy. If you've installed it a strange way and it's not in the path, you can just put the direct path to FFmpeg in that location. Use manual settings there, you can tick, and that will let you split out the image path and the MP4 path, so you can specify where those go. By default, they just go in the same folder. Over here, you see you've got the settings there, and I've also got the MP4 and all the frames. I'm fine with them all being in the same directory. I just don't bother with that. Okay, so that's a quick summary of all those settings, but what do they all do? What do all these defaults and things look like? Well, let's have a look, shall we? Let's have a look. So I've got a number of different videos here. They've got this same sort of file name format. I'm using the default prompt here, and this is 2D, although the last one is 3D. I'm using a fixed seed for the first three, and then iter, random and iter again. The seed is 666 in that case, and I'm changing the cadence a little bit. In the first one, I've got cadence 1. In the next one, I'm using the full steps. In this stable diffusion here, in settings, there's an option down here with image to image, do exactly the number of steps the slider specifies. If you've got that ticked, then that will probably mess up because it's the same as having a strength of 0 all the time. I'll show you what that looks like. It may be something that you want. And then there I'm increasing the cadence to 4 so you can see the effect of the smoothness. Here I'm using the iter seed option, then the random seed option, and then finally 3D mode. So let's have a look at these. First one here, this is that fixed seed, and as you can see, it's perhaps not quite what you expected because it's not like the introduction videos at all. It's all gone a bit funny. That is the effect of the fixed seed there. Now, if we do exactly the same thing, but with a full number of steps, you can see it's like a sort of flickery animation to start with, and it holds it together fairly well, but then breaks out into that funny shape again as well. Let's have a look at the third one, and this is with the cadence. So I'm smoothing that out, and we get the nice smooth animation there. So it seems to sort of bounce in a little bit nicer, and we get some bananas, but then it does start to lose it still towards the end. How do we stop it from losing it? Well, that's where the iter seed comes in. Here we have it with the iter seed. As you can see, it's changing quite a bit, but it's a nice smooth animation. It's kind of keeping it together. We're getting the coconuts, we're getting the bananas, we're getting the durian fruit, all that sort of thing. It's looking nice. That's quite a good set of settings. Here we've got the random seed. The difference there between the random and the iter, how much difference does that make? A fair amount of difference. As you can see, it's changing slightly more dramatically as it zooms in, certainly more noticeable on those mountains. We're getting a lot more mountain change going on there using the random seed. And if we have a look at this final one, which is the 3D mode, and in the 3D mode, you can see it zoom in quite fast there. That's the zoom of 10, zooming in a lot, lots of change. It still looks all right, but it is zooming in quite fast. That's what happens if you run that. You know, you barely change anything between fixed seed and the cadence. You get all those different sorts of videos. Okay, how do you figure out what anything does in there? It's still all a bit confusing. I mean, you understand that you can go over a thing and you can hover over it and you've got the pop-up and you can read it and it says 2D operator to rotate canvas clockwise, anti-clockwise, but you still don't really understand what it means. Okay, then this is for you. What we're going to do here is we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, we're going to make it a little bit easier. And then once we've made it a little bit easier, we're going to save those settings and keep it like that as a base to test from. So we have a look at the Run tab to start with. And most of these defaults are absolutely fine. I've got my test name there. I've got my seed behavior as iter. That all looks good. Don't want to change very much in there. Keyframes, I'm going to keep it on 3D. Zoom, this looks weird. I'm going to change this. I'm going to change that to 1 because that's what the pop-up says is static. What else have we got in here? This I don't tend to use, but you could zero that out as well if you want. Noise, that tends to go along with the strength, so those two are quite important. The noise schedule, if it's very high, will add a lot of noise to it, so it will get very, very grainy. I tend to turn that down to 0 if I'm increasing the strength quite a lot. The higher the strength, the more the image won't change. So with a really low strength like 0.1, the image will change a lot. With a really high strength, the image won't change very much, but then you could get that same issue as you saw with the fixed seed, where it starts to go all a bit weird and blurry. For the most part, 0.6 is a good one, and 0.01 is a reasonable noise schedule for that. Contrast I don't tend to change. Guidance scale I don't tend to change. Those I don't tend to change. Diffusion between 2 and 4 for my default. I'm going to leave that on 3 for my default. And 3D depth warping, again, I don't change. Prompts, I get rid of those prompts and I just put something in a lot more simple, because then it looks easier. Let's just pop that in. There we go. Now I've got some default prompts in it. Absolutely fine, because that changes per thing. Video output, I've got all of those set to exactly how I want. Now I've got everything set up how I want. If you want to set any other particular things, now is the time to do it. Go to any other tabs. If you've got any particular preferences, then set those, because we're going to save these that you can use as a base. Here we are. We've got this text box down here. I save that as nerdy rodent deforum settings, and let's save those settings. Those are saved. And the same with the video settings. I don't bother changing it on the video settings, because those are, I always want those to be the same for everything. And now I have those settings saved. You can load those in again, and it will set you back to this spot where you've got a nice, less confusing prompt, and all your keyframes are zeroed. Oh, forgot to zero out that translation there as well. Let's save my settings again. You can do this as you go along as well. Sometimes when you're working on an animation, you may want to play with it a little bit, and it's like, oh, well, what happens if I do change this angle here and this angle here? You can save your settings, and if it doesn't work, you can just load your settings, and often you'll be changing many things at once, and you won't have an easy undo because you've changed so much stuff. You can save as you go along as well. It's quite handy. Right, so there we go. Now we've got a nice empty thing to go from. Now you can test. Everything's saved. You can revert quite easily. If you want to test a particular thing, for example, there I've got 3D settings, translation Z. So 3D settings, translation Z. If I just change that thing to 0.5, then I'll know what that thing does, because I haven't changed anything else. I've just changed that one thing. Let's have a look at that. Although in this case I have actually changed one more thing. I've changed the prompt because I want to have a prompt in there. My prompt by default is a little blank one that says, please fill in the prompt. I have a portrait painting of a woman that changes into a portrait painting of a cute rodent at frame 2. Let's have a look at this with the zoom 0.5 in 3D mode. Okay, interesting. It's zooming in quite nicely and then turns into a rodent. Brilliant. Although that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I had portrait of a cute rodent in at 2, and yet it didn't turn into a cute rodent until quite a way through. So that's something to watch out for, is that it will take a little bit of time to diffuse those things, especially if you've got a very high cadence, because it will skip all those diffusion steps. Now you have an understanding of how to test any setting. You can go back, you can reload your settings, that will set it back to its 0 state, and you can change another thing. So then you could change angle, or you could change zoom, or you could change translation X, change any setting you like, and you will see exactly what that one setting does all by itself. Now, how do we make this even more awesome? We make it more awesome with maths, don't we? Yes. Oh no. Okay. All right. Here's a little bit on the maths. It is rather simple by using the Desmos graphing calculator. So here we've got an example from one of those things. I think that's the zoom that it does by default. So here we can visualize what that zoom actually is and how those values change. You can probably just about see that it's a sine wave. So it starts off at 1.02, because there it is, 1.02 plus the sine, and then it goes up, and then it goes down, and then it goes up and down and up and down. It's a little bit easier to see if you make this bigger. There we go. So as you can see, the values go up and down. At t equals 0, you're going to have that value, and then at t equals 5, you're going to have that value, etc. So that is how you get smoothly changing values. You don't have to enter each keyframe one at a time. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4. That's t is x in this, x is t. They are both exactly the same thing. Let's have a look at the basic one. Basic one is just starting off like that. as you can see, it goes up and down. If you want to keep it purely above the line, then you can do it to the power 2, for example, and that will keep it above. You can do it to the power 3 and it will look wiggly. There's all sorts of things you can play with in here. You can times them together as well. Say I want to times that by half of x, and we'll get, let's see, 1.02 plus, oops, come here, plus half of x, and then we get, you know, a very, very wiggly line that's not, it doesn't quite look like a sine wave at all. It's all sorts of strange things. If you're not sure what any of the functions do, that doesn't matter. There's a show keypad down there. You can click functions. It will give you a load of extra functions. A lot of them work in Python, many of them don't, but if you stick to sin and cos, then you're usually going to be fine. So you could change this to cos as well. There you go. And that's how it does it. If you want to make it bigger, you can multiply it as well. So I could say 5 times there, and then that makes it bigger. You can shift it along, just change these numbers. Those are your frames, that's t. That's how you visualize how your values are going to change over time using that graphing calculator. I've got another little example here in case none of that makes any sense. Say you want something to happen at 4 seconds in your video, and your video is running at 24 frames a second. That means 96 frames is when you want that thing to happen. You may want a sine wave, for example, and you may want it to go up and down on that 96 seconds. We've got here, if we do this one here, pop this in here. Now, I have to change pi to the actual pi symbol in here. Where are we? Pi, there we go. Okay, now we've got pi divided by 96, because we want it to happen on the 96. We times it by x. X is t in Python, as you can see. There we go. When we get over here to 96, it's back down to 0. So there we have the whole first half of the wave happening at 96, and that's all relative to your video, because that's when you want that thing to happen. You want it to do a thing until you get to 96, and you want 96 to be 0 again. There you go. That's how you work it out. If you want different things to happen, nice smooth waves that happen in particular times, it's quite easy. As mentioned in Desmos there, it's x, and in Deforum, then you have to put t there. Also note that pi, you can't just type pi in here. I had a go. If you put 3.14159, that will do as pi in Deforum. You could just copy that in there, in here, angle. There you go. That'll be the angle that will change. It will start off at 0, and then by frame 96, 4 seconds later, it will be back down to 0 again. That's how to maths by looking at it. It's nice to see. It's nice to see the visualization there, and also to click on it and see how the numbers go, so you can see exactly how your animation is going to happen. That is more than enough maths. Let's have a look at this next test here. This is my awesome test. Now, in this one, I used some maths. So it's got some maths in there. So it's a smooth up and down curve. I've also used an ancestral sampler as well with a very low strength. Let's have a look at that one. There he goes. It's a little bit jittery because of such a low strength. It was 0.25 on that one. As you can see, it sort of works for that kind of animation because it looks like the rodent is sniffing. There's a little prompt change in there. He starts off in the woods and then becomes cyberpunk. So that's how you can smoothly go up, smoothly go down using those waves. Now, some bonus tips for those of you that made it to this point. Those really smooth, nice, coherent, consistent videos that you've seen, you're probably not going to get that with this. Expect things to change over time. Many factors will influence your final outcome. Have a look at all the different things, try all the different samplers. For example, in here, you've got an absolute boatload of samplers, and they are all ever so slightly different. Some faster than others, some slower. You get different outputs with the same seed as well. Lots of things to try in there. Do go with the flow, with your artistic vision, because it's going to happen. It's going to change things for you. You're going to start, even if you start out with an initial image, it's going to change into something which you probably didn't expect. Things which have lots of movement in are very good. Like in my example video at the beginning, I've got the waves crashing there. Other things are like anything where you've got movement, so crowds, pictures changing in a gallery, which was, you wouldn't necessarily have movement, but it's all right if the pictures change. Things like that. Have a think about all sorts of stuff you can do. Now, the really, really weird bit and fun bit, let's have a look at this. The live video jockey. Now, I'm using the in-painting mask and the in-painting checkpoint here. If you haven't got this little scroller up the top, if you go over to settings, and then in the quick settings list here, I've added in-paint mask weight. That's how I got this little slider up here. And that slider works in real time. So if you click generate and you're generating a video and it's happy going through, you can actually change the slider as you go along. You can drop it down to 0 if you want, wait for it to diffuse. You can drop it, you can put it up again, and you can get some really strange effects doing that. There's a little example video happening now. So there you go. You can do live in-painting conditioning while you're generating if you want to sit there and play with a slider. It's quite weird. And of course, one final little tip, don't be afraid to try all of the things. You've got that methodology for testing things. Test every single thing. I've also got a couple more videos here if you're interested in clicking on any of those. This beginner's one for PYTTY, that goes through a lot of the motions because that's what this was built on, and there's another video for you to click on there if you're interested in running the collab locally.